Okay, I'm just going to look at my phone here. You guys do the same thing. Let's share this as everyone joins us there now. Look at my phone here, guys. You guys do the same
better
thing.
Turn
Yeah,
down
turn
the
down your
volume.
volume too, people. We don't get into a feedback loop here. Well, good night, everybody, or good evening. I'm still getting used to doing these things in the evening now when there's some light outside. For the longest time, once you get past 5 o'clock, it's pitch dark, but it's nice and bright now. I almost don't need my fancy light I got up there. So thanks for taking some time to join us this evening as we have this important and timely conversation. First, before I talk about what we're going to talk about tonight, I want to give a little bit of feedback, or a little bit of background on why we're doing these kinds of conversations, a bit of history behind it. So a few years ago now, we started or restarted a beer and hymns group here in St. John's. It was actually something that Miriam had started with Cochrane Street United, and then it kind of went into a hiatus, and then we got together and brought it back. And then from that relationship in beer and hymns, we started to talk about, you know, having some opportunities for us as church leaders, both ordained and lay people, to come together, talk about stuff, support each other, share ideas and resources, inspire each other. And so we came up with this idea for the Open Table Collective. Soon after we got that idea, bang, here comes COVID. And we never got to get together to actually do much of anything. But then we had another idea. We said, let's use the medium of social media and Zoom and all this technical, you know, digital stuff that we have now, and have this kind of conversation here online. So back when COVID was, you know, first, you know, upon us, we got together for a few conversations. And now we thought it would be a good time to get together again because, and I can't believe this, I know you can't believe it, it's been a friggin' year. A year of COVID, a year of restrictions, a year of social distancing, a year almost of masks, a year of not being able to gather together in our churches to worship, to be limited when we could get together and how many people could be there. And the impacts on the church are undeniable. It's been a challenge, no doubt. And will be for a while, I think. I think we're going to be living with the effects of COVID for a long time. But I don't think it's all bad news. I think there are some good things. There are even, I think, some signs of hope, which is what was buried in the title of our gathering tonight, Emergency. Notice that the opening part is bolded, emerge. Something is emerging in the church. Yes, the challenges are there, but there's the opportunity and a lot of creativity that we've seen over the last year. So that's a bit of background as to how we got to where we are to have this conversation tonight. And I'm super excited to have the people with me tonight that we have. We shared some introductions on the event page, but I just want to take an opportunity to go around real quick and introduce the people who are with me. So I've got Miriam Bowlby from Cochrane Street United here in St. John's. I've got Tony Bidgood from St. Teresa's Roman Catholic Church, also here in St. John's, although he's in the West End. So we, you know, we let him in anyways. Tyler Cramm from Bethel Pentecostal Church in Bay Roberts, out around the Bay. Originally from Botwood, but we won't hold that against him either. And then we've got Joanne Mercer from Twillingate, soon to be Provost of Queen's College Faculty of Theology. So we're all really excited about that. So the idea of tonight, the people on our panel are going to share, I should say too, in case you don't know, I'm Rob Cooke. I'm from St. Mark's here in St. John's and also do a bit of side gig at Queen's College as well. So, hi. So the plan for tonight, the panelists are going to share some of their thoughts. I have some questions here. For every question that I ask the panelists, we're hoping that the people who are watching online on Facebook Live will share their thoughts, their answers to these questions. And maybe even you want to throw out a question for the panelists to answer as well. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. I am going to be watching the live stream to see if anybody has anything to say. So let's get going with the first question. What have you learned about parish ministry or church ministry this year? I'm only asking for one thing. There's probably a whole bunch. Anybody want to start us?
I was going to just say it's a bit flippant, but we can change if we have to. But only and the change happened quickly, but often you'd say, this is a great idea. It'll, bring us make us more accessible, more modern. And it's like, no, we can't do that. We have never done that before. But all of a sudden COVID came, and all the things that we thought we couldn't do, we can do. And people learned and adapted far more quickly than we ever gave them credit for. So I'd say we can change quicker than we think we can.
Yeah, the example I keep giving for that is look at what Memorial University just did. Like they just moved all of their, in-class stuff online in a matter of months. So, and the fact that everybody shifted so quickly to online church is a testament to what we can do, right? Anybody else? Some big learning?
Go ahead, yeah.
You go ahead.
That was actually one of the notes that I had jotted down here, that people can adapt quicker and easier than we ever give them credit for. We always talk about how, we got to change needs to happen slow when people aren't ready and they're not there. And, but I remember we met as a church board on a Friday when we first heard rumblings of COVID. We said, yeah, we'll shut down probably for 2 weeks and then we'll see how it goes from there. And then it was almost 7 months to the day that we opened up again. And it was just like, man, what just happened? Like it was a whirlwind, right? But I definitely agree. People can change definitely easier and quicker than we give them credit for. But one of the things that I learned that I jotted down here too, is that more than we'd like to probably admit is that our ministries were deeply tied to tradition. And routines and all these sorts of things, and that was quickly stripped from us, and we had, and that that's why we had to adapt so quick, I guess. But
definitely, yep. We're still struggling with some of that tradition stuff.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yep. I want to just pick up on Tyler's point. I think you're exactly right. We as a church got used to doing things a certain way. We got used to doing services, in our case, sacraments, and then all of that was gone. And what the nice reminder that COVID brought to me was in the feedback we were getting from our congregation when they were joining us for online, how grateful they were, how they were fed and nourished by the services online. And it was just a reminder to me that God's grace cannot be contained by any ritual or sacrament or institution. God is always going to find a way to reach people. And like people were not, it wasn't just, oh, this is nice, as a substitute. I mean, in the beginning, I think it might have been that, but as people got used to it, they were like, no, we're being fed. This has helped us. And that's happened both lockdowns. And I kind of stood back from that and said, you know what? Sometimes the church needs to just get out of the way and let God's grace do what God's grace wants to do. And it'll happen. And it was a nice reminder. I mean, it was an awful way to get a reminder, but it was a good reminder.
And I would want to pick up on that too, Tony, that when I thought about that question when Rob sent it, it was sort of like two sides of a coin. I learned just how much my ministry and the the visible work that we do was tied to buildings. Like we were so attached to what we do, either in the church building or in the church hall or, in a building. But when we couldn't do that, and when we weren't in the building, how engaged the lay people in my communities have become. Like their ministries have just been so bright, and it's sort of their need to contact people, their need to stay in touch, to drop off things, to see that people are taken care of. Their pastoral ministries really seem to grow. And again, I think is that God is very active and sort of probably been setting seeds in some of these people's lives for decades, and never felt they could, never felt they should, because it was all what happened there was important. But with COVID, I think I'm hoping we're going to see, but not just because of my new job, but like a rise in vocations, people recognizing that I can do God's work too. And I think I've noticed that a lot.
Yeah. A follow-up question to that question would be, how has your understanding of even church changed in the last year? Right? Is it? Do you have the same framework now for understanding church, what a church is? Tyler and I had this kind of funny exchange this morning. I thought he was asking a serious question, because my question was, about parish ministry, and he said, "What is a parish?" So I've very,
You went Anglican on him. Go ahead, say it.
He did. Yeah,
I went Anglican, and I was saying, it's territorial, geographical, and all that stuff. And he was like, "Dude, I'm joking." but to me, that's what I'm trying to get at now with this question is, so how has COVID and the pandemic changed the way that we understand just what a church is?
I hope it has. When we first came back in September, I did a sermon series that I called Theological Crisis, and the first thing we talked about was what is the church. And when everyone went live on Facebook for the first couple months, we saw things from let's do church, let's have church, let's watch church, let's be church. I miss church, can't wait to get back to church. I just kind of sat back and I was like, man, like, what is church? Is it something you can do and be and have and watch and listen to and miss and get back to? You know what I mean? So for the first, probably the better part of the year, I just took a step back and I was like, man, like, what is it that we do? Is it when we gather that we're church? Is it right now in my living room? Is it church? Is it on Zoom calls? Is it on phone calls? Is it in Tim Hortons? Like,
boundaries have stretched.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
And I feel like most people would have agreed at some point that if you asked them what the church is, they would have said it's not the building, it's the people. But in practice, I'm not sure we really believe that.
Yeah. I think there was a wink, wink, nod, nod when we would say that.
Yeah, it's like in
the
Sunday
church
school.
is the building. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's like in Sunday school when they ask a question, the right answer is always Jesus. It's the same sort of thing, right?
Yeah, but in reality, if you looked at, where we put our money and our time and our energy, it's in the building, it's in the institution, it's in paying us professionals, right?
Big time.
And so that's why I was interested in what Joanne was saying about lay ministry, and the conversation this morning got me thinking about, like, so what even is a church? COVID has really played with our understanding of what a church is, right? No, I don't think the idea of like parish boundaries and stuff now is like totally out the window.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I look at who engages with our church's Facebook page and our church's YouTube page, and you watch where people are kind of tuning in from, and it's everywhere. Like, there are people who have moved away whose home church was Cochrane Street and have come back and started worshiping at Cochrane Street again because they can, because that geographical boundary is gone. And then there's also all the people you don't know are watching you. Like this has been my kind of question. If they're tuning in and joining you week after week and we don't exactly know who they are they still part of our church? Are they still, how do we care for them and support them when we don't exactly know who they are?
When the first full week of Lent, myself and a few colleagues, we did, in our tradition, we have Lenten missions. So usually a 4-day period of time that involves music and preaching and ritual to kind of, get people into the Lenten experience. So we had planned to do a mission in the Basilica, and it was going to be for the Archdiocese. And then, of course, the lockdown came. And so we ended up doing it all online in the Basilica. So at that point, there was 5 of us, including the tech person and a music person, in the Basilica. So if you've ever been in the Basilica, you know it's a pretty big church. And there was 5 of us in there all together. And I remember it was a 4-night thing. And the first night it was weird. It was just really weird standing in that great big church in that pulpit that looms over everything. And you're looking out at empty pews, talking to a camera. But by the second night, I had a really strong sense of being connected to people. Like we were following the analytics and saying, okay, so many numbers of people were watching you this night and all the rest of it. And we were getting some feedback, like posts on Facebook and emails saying, thanks very much. And even though you couldn't see them, and I haven't processed it all enough yet to really explain this, but that connection, I felt a real connection with people that I could not see in front of me. And there was something to that. I don't know what it is, but to your question, Rob, there's something about church in that not only it came back to me, like, it was a back and forth. It wasn't just me talking and me giving and me ministering. I was receiving something too. And, we're all used to that in an assembly where you can see people and see their reactions, or if they're nodding off during your homily or whatever the case may be, you get some kind of a feedback. But when you don't see anybody, and yet you could feel something. And I don't know what that means, but it's something. And there's something happening.
Yeah, I just wanted to share one of the comments, and it's kind of weird because we're streaming to a bunch of different places, and so the comments are not all coming up in the same place. So I'm watching 2 different streams, try to keep up on the thing. So if I look a little distracted, that's what's going on. So Jesse Broder says, I believe the COVID experience gave us some diversity in Anglican worship and other various forms of expressing and experiencing God. Any thoughts on that? Does anybody feel that COVID, the pandemic, my next questions are about online digital worship, but maybe this is a good one to get us over there. Did you feel like you could experiment a little bit with liturgy when it came to the pandemic?
I think there's a couple things to sort of pick up a little bit, Tony. A lot of stuff we learned about church was how relational it is, right? And, whether or not you physically see people, like the people, like you talked, Miriam, about people who had a connection to your parish, to your church, tuning in, right? So you renewed relationships. And so we have a lot of, like, I was amazed at the comments I got from a lot of our shut-ins who haven't been able to go to church for ages. Right? Or people who, went to the mainland or went somewhere and got stuck there and couldn't get back, And so you sort of realize people were connecting. So I think there's that. And then I realized a lot of my parishioners I was talking to, some of them were watching 4 or 5 liturgies a Sunday. So they were watching an Anglican one, a Catholic one, because they knew the person who played music there, and their good friend is the Pentecostal pastor in this town, so they're watching that. And then, like, they remember when that Salvation Army officer used to be in Twillingate, so they were watching that. Where they chose to worship was usually rooted in a relationship, right? There was a connection. So I do think that that is important, and I do think especially the first lockdown, I loved it because I didn't know how to do any of this I'm doing now. So I was taping stuff. And I mean, like, I was having an adventure every week. It was like, where are we going to go? We went out on a field. We went up here. We went this way. That, like, it was like, we can do anything. We can go anywhere. And that was sort of amazing that once you sort of left the building, lots of things were possible. Right?
I'd almost say, if I can, real quick, your comment about people watching this church and that church and this church and the other church, I'd almost call that somewhat of a downfall of online church a little bit too. I know early on, I found myself, I would click on one church for 30 seconds and then flick to the next one, and then flick to the next one, and flick to the next one. So in a world where videos are, like 15 seconds or less, I found when people were producing like an hour and a half videos that I wasn't there for more than 5 minutes, right? So I was flicking through and going to this church and seeing what this skipper was saying and this one was saying and what this one was wearing and how bad this singer was, like just flicking through all of them, right? So I would say that was probably, in my opinion, a bit of a downfall of online church too, because it was tough to get one message out to your people,
Yeah, and I decided early on in the live streaming stuff that I wasn't going to watch anybody else, because I found I would watch. So say if I was watching, because there was several times I watched things Tyler was doing and I'm thinking, geez, that is cool. I wish I had time to do that. Like, I should have time to do that. Or I would watch, what Joanne was doing and say, man, that is so cool. I wish I could. And I was just racked with this kind of, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but just the sense that I wasn't doing enough. I should be doing more. So I just said, I'm not going to watch that. I'm just going to do my own thing. And, everybody else can do their own thing, and try not to compare myself too much to other people and what they were doing.
Yeah, I got to that point too. It got real tough for a while, man. Like being the one to write and produce and film the videos, and then watching like what the church down the road was doing and how much better their stuff was. I was like, oh my gosh, like what am I even doing this for?
Yeah.
So I too got to the same point.
Yeah. I watched for the opposite reason. I liked watching because I'm like, oh, I like that idea. I'm going to see how I can steal that and adapt it for my own use.
I love that.
And I think I did that with you, Miriam. How did you do that?
Yeah.
But
a great outlet for creativity too. I really like doing some different things within the liturgy, whether it was making prayers visual or because you could. Or I sometimes took scripture readings and made them into little mini videos, like all sorts of stuff. I loved doing that. It was fun.
I'm noticing that our numbers are going up a little bit, so there's people joining us. So I just wanted to remind people that we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. So please share your thoughts and your comments and stuff. I think I'll get them. I'm not sure. Some of them are showing up on the Open Table Collective page, and some of them are on the St. Mark's page. So if I don't see it, I apologize, but we will go back through the feed after and address any questions and stuff that are there. So right now we're still kind of talking about changes within the church parishes, that COVID kind of brought out some good things and some challenges and those kinds of things. I think now it's time for us to, because we're flirting with this question anyways. My second question has to do with technology and liturgy. So we've said a little bit about liturgy already. And I know this is a big, wide open question that we could probably spend the whole hour just talking about this. What have you learned about technology and liturgy? Where do we start?
It's expensive.
Yeah, that's a fact.
I guess one of the things that I will say, and it's kind of, I suppose, the opposite of what you said, Tyler, is that it's a platform to speak to so many more people than just the people who actually used to physically come into the church, right? And I was talking to some friends who don't go to church, and they said, "Oh yeah, we checked out your service on Sunday," and I liked what you said, or I didn't understand, or I didn't like what you said. Why did you say that? And I think right now for this world that we're living in, where people are really spiritually hungry and seeking, but don't identify. But they want to try stuff on. They want to check things out. And they're not necessarily ready or don't have the time to kind of physically hop around different churches. But they can go all over the world, and they can, find a way to be fed and to explore. And I think that's something that we never had before, and I think that's a good thing. Now, there's another side to it, that it becomes, so there's overwhelming. But I really think that's one of the benefits of technology and liturgy, for sure, and technology in church.
I want to pick up what you said, because it sort of ties into what I was thinking. Because you said your friends sort of commented on you, on what they saw and heard, and people who don't normally go to church. So I think what is great too is not just that we can speak to a way larger group of people, we can hear a way larger group of people, because they are going on and sending comments, sending you messages, sending you, like I have ministry with people online that I who would never come to my church or even probably phone me on the phone, but like have connected through this medium. So I think that, like not only do we get to hear, to be heard, we get to hear a whole other group of people who we don't normally get any feedback from or any input from, to hear their concerns and their questions. And man, that's amazing.
Good point. Yeah.
Just to clarify real quick, I don't think that online ministry is bad. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I just think that one of the downfalls is the 15-second time span that a lot of people have.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that means we have to be really good at what we do online, so that when you get them for 15 seconds, you don't get up like a scroll on to the next one.
Swipe right.
I think one of the big challenges, and I think we talked about this in the first conversation that we had about technology, about digital church, was we're still, even now, most of us, taking what we would do on a normal, typical Sunday and then putting that up on Facebook or YouTube, or trying to do it through Zoom. One of the challenges is what we do when we're like in typical church, when we're in the physical building gathered together, is not always easily translatable over into digital media. And so, as you know, any thoughts on that and the challenge of translating what we do in person to online? Like, I think one of the things that's been challenged is preaching. And I think this is what Tyler is maybe getting at too, right? Is, for us in my tradition, we do what, a 10 or 12 minute sermon. Tyler probably preaches for what, 2 hours?
At least. And that depends on if the spirit falls.
But I mean, you're doing what, a half hour, 40 minutes probably?
You're probably 25, 30 usually.
25, 30? Yeah. So online, you can't do 5 minutes or a half hour. I find even 10 to 12 is really stretching people's attention span. And it is so easy for people to just say, well, this is boring, I'm going to go on to the next thing, right? So any thoughts about that stuff, about what we don't normally, what we used to do, and what this new medium is going to mean for us?
I actually, I might be a little bit of an oddball in this conversation, because I have never streamed a service or recorded a service for Facebook. Because I kind of sat back when it started and thought to myself, I don't think that's necessarily the best content for online. So we took an entirely different approach right from the get-go. So I've been doing just shorter teaching videos, 10 to 12 minutes max, that are just like to the point. Here's something you can learn, watch this, take away from it. We've been doing cooking videos. We call them Church in the Kitchen. So we took a very different approach from the beginning for these reasons. Because I know I wouldn't sit down for a full hour and watch a video of what we would do on a Sunday morning. I just didn't think it translated well anyway. So I took a different approach right from the get-go.
Yeah, Tyler's kitchen videos are amazing, by the way. You should
I'm gonna go-
definitely friend him or find him on Twitter and Instagram.
They're on my church page, Bethel Bay Roberts.
Just amazing stuff. I mean, it takes a lot of work though, Tyler.
Oh my
A lot of
goodness.
work.
We do one video a week, and we put it
think-
up Fridays at 10:30 because it's nuts.
I think people who consume these videos don't realize really how much work goes into it.
No.
Even just the live stream, because we've been the opposite at St. Mark's. We've live streamed everything. I haven't pre-recorded anything, only just the stuff we've been doing for NTV, just because we have to. But even just the live stream takes a lot of work, right? The technical stuff and just I feel like it takes a different kind of energy out of me.
It does.
To be speaking into a camera rather than speaking to a room full of people.
And I find it challenging when we're live streaming Sunday morning and you've got people there in person, which we don't right now. But then you also have to be very aware of where the camera is, and that this is also being put up for the public and what that online audience is like. So you have to design your liturgy in such a way that it translates for both online and in person, because I don't have enough time in the week to do two separate things. Like there's one of me. I couldn't put together a video for online consumption and do church on Sunday. So how to make the Sunday morning experience translate well both for in person and online. That's been kind of one of the challenges I've been kind of
for us too. One thing we shortened it.
Yeah, we have too.
Right. So but now it's different again. Once we reopened in September and we were in the building for church, we went back to it wasn't as long. We would normally be an hour or maybe an hour and 15 minutes if we had a bigger congregation or a baptism or something like that.
If the Spirit fell.
But we're talking about an Anglican church, so that never happens. So we would be hour 15 minutes. In the pandemic, we were in lockdown and only just live streaming. We were about a half hour. When we came back into the building, we were about 45 minutes once we started incorporating music. And I find that's really pushing people's attention spans for online. But I started doing a separate, one thing you kind of morphed into something else. I was doing a community check-in where I would just sit down in front of the camera like this, just talk about what was going on that week, and people would make comments and stuff. And then that kind of grew into, it's almost taken on the air of a show now where I have guests, there's a topic, there's some live music. It's really cool and it works and people love it. But for me, that's finding the different way, not just the regular stuff that we do and trying to make that work online, but finding a new way to kind of engage with people.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think some of it has to do with your demographics as well, in terms, so I think things that are created, at least for me, the things that I created exclusively for online that didn't follow any liturgical kind of norm and were a bit more creative, great for people who don't go to church. Do you know what I mean? So they got to hear the message in a different way and they got to engage in a different way. But I have been surprised because, a lot of my parishioners are slightly older than I am. Sorry to out you all, but you are. But they are quite able to sit down and watch 45 minutes or an hour and love it. And they love hearing how often, so now, I often will play a hymn I couldn't play in church because we don't know it, but when I play a hymn they know, love that hymn, one of my favorites, right? Love that prayer, love that, it's so nice to see, because we do it this way with 4 or 5 people and we stream it, so nice to see so and so, right? So I think it's both, there is something, I think you're right, Tyler, to creating things that are made for this environment. And I think it's a both and. So we need to create things when we can, as we're able, because we're only human, for this environment. But we also need to recognize there's a whole group of people who really like the familiar, especially in a year where everything has changed, right? To hear a familiar hymn or familiar prayer or familiar structure, to see a familiar face. I really underestimated the value of that in terms of liturgy, but it was quite clear when people spoke back to me that that was really important.
Yeah, and there's a couple of questions that I really want to get to that have come from people online about the digital worship thing. Jennifer Langdon was wondering, once things go back to normal, whatever that is, and whatever that's going to be, she wants to know, will we continue to use online worship? Will we continue to have digital church?
I don't see how you can go back. Like, I just, I think now being online and in person is going to be the standard. And I don't think there's any going back. And there's some, like, I run a prayer group and I ran it for a long time in the church in person. And my take up on the prayer group was very low. And now I run prayer group through Zoom, and we sit there for 20 minutes and pray together. And I've gotten really great uptake on it. So I think there's some things that I'm not going to go back to online prayer group or in-person prayer group. I'm going to keep it online because it works better. But I think we're good. I think we're both for the long haul now.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see how we can go back. You know, it's because it works in so many ways, and people connect, and that's where everything else is. And so and just we've learned things that do work. Like we do a centering prayer group here, and everybody gets on their computer screens and they sit and look at the screen and meditate in silence for 20 minutes. You know, and they do it in the comfort of their home. Now, we also do one in the church, but, you know, people like it, and some stuff really works. So, and like I said, we bought all this nice fancy equipment.
And that can't go to waste. Definitely not.
Just an update on the streams. So I'm finally just now starting to see the comments from the Open Table collective stream. For some reason before I wasn't seeing any of the questions and stuff. So a lot of the stuff we've moved beyond it. But
Love that.
Kendallin did ask a similar question about technology and how we use it, you know, once we go back to, you know, being together and make better use. I think we're going to be in a hybrid world for moving forward.
Yeah.
Right?
That's it's almost not an option.
That's why I think there's going to be more pressure on us to, you know, to find some of the ways, like, you know, Tyler's in the kitchen and prayer groups and what I've been doing with community check-in, some alternative ways to engage with people. Because I think a lot of the things we've said are really, really true about it's those kinds of things, I think, that will get people who are, you know, not the churchy type of people, right? That might be more, I want to shift gears again now, still within the liturgy conversation, but I got to go back to the St. Mark's page here. Roz Bartlett, excellent point. She says Eucharist is still a challenge that hasn't been solved for the online community. Now, I remember back in the early days of the pandemic when we were first kind of pushed out of the building, there was so much great conversation going on about communion and what you might call digital communion, and whether, you know, I could be sitting in front of my webcam here with bread and wine and consecrate it, and so people at home could have their bread and wine and then, you know, consume, and we'd all share communion that way. Some great conversations. And then it felt like once we went back into the building, all that stuff just stopped. So here's our chance now to talk about communion and digitality. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And we have a fairly diverse, you know, understanding of communion here. So this could go completely nuts. But that's what we're here for.
Ask that question, I go, what challenge?
I know.
It's been seamless. People have their elements at home. We gather around the table. It's like we're apart but together, and in one heart and mind and body as we gather at the table. So it hasn't been even a struggle for us. People have liked having their elements, and some people have started getting fancy and getting like nice bread and wine and actually, making it a feast while they gather and worship. So it hasn't really been the challenge, but that's a different sacramental theology too. So that makes a difference.
Yeah, but even at St. Mark's, I've had so many of my parishioners who've come up to me and kind of, they look around and say, I've been having communion the whole time. Because they find somewhere that's offering online communion and then they participate, which I think says something about the authority that the church has or doesn't have anymore. Like the idea of telling people, don't do that, right? They're going to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Tony, what do you think about that? Because you're
I was waiting. Yeah.
And trust me, Francis is not listening to this.
No, that's okay. I don't care.
He's got bigger
He's got a lot of
issues.
bigger problems on it. Yeah, all right. Don't wait. Oh God. Anyway, that's for another open table discussion. It's certainly a problem within the Roman Catholic Church, in the sense that our sacramental theology, where we believe in the real presence, is something that the digital format, prevents in the strict sense of understanding the sacramental theology. One of the things we do here is we have a prayer of spiritual communion. And so we put that up on the screen. And so it's a way for people to participate in that moment of the celebration of the Mass. It's not the same. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is. However, I'll go back to my previous point, is that I really have come to believe that grace does provide. When I think of when I think of the struggles and the failures of the church, my church in particular, I know that God finds a way around that. I trust that, and I don't believe that people who can't physically be in the building are somehow denied God's grace. I don't know how God does it. I don't pretend to know how that works. I wouldn't even be able to figure it out anyway. And God hasn't told me. He or she hasn't let me in on the secret. But I can't accept the fact that if a pandemic happens and people can't be in church for very good reasons, that God's up there saying, well, nothing I can do about it. That's not the God I believe in, right? And so, it is a problem from a sacramental theological point of view. And, we hold that when the community gathers together physically and the body of Christ is present in all of the elements, in the Eucharist, in the proclamation of the word, in the people, in the minister, then the true presence is there. But in my heart of hearts, I know that in people's living rooms, the true presence of Christ is there in ways that would blow my mind and our mind. And so that's my answer. It's not a cop-out, but I know the sacramental theology in its fullness is quite beautiful. But this has also shown the limitation of it, right? And so at this point, right now, I'm like, okay, well, it's in God's hands, and I don't mean that as a cliche. I mean that as a source of hope, and you see it. My parents are elderly, and so they watch Mass on TV. They're not so much into the computer and internet stuff, right? But I called my parents a couple of weeks ago, and it was a Sunday morning, and they usually have a liturgy of the word and communion service in their building, but that was canceled. And so they're quite elderly, and I said, "Oh, Dad, what'd you do today?" "Well, I watched the Pope have Mass in Iraq." and I thought, and he said, "I really enjoyed it." And I thought, well, boy, here you go. Here's a man in his 90s plugged into this global event and somehow followed along with all the prayers. So why wouldn't I think that God touched him in as full a way as possible within those circumstances? So,
yeah.
Joanne,
anything to add?
No, I think a couple of things. One is I'm never sure with this. You and I have had a lot of conversations, and I waffle a lot. If this is a question of sacramental theology or a question of authority and power. And recognizing that our theology often is created to uphold our understandings of authority and power. And I also recognize, too, that one of the liturgy professors I had, I'm not going to name them, would often say that, things happen in church and then we create a theology around it. So whenever, like, as students, we'd say, well, how come we got to stand here? Or why do we have to do that? Well, my priest told me we're supposed to do this, blah, 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 and give us long reason as to why, the theology of why they had to do this particularly liturgical action. And to which you would say, yeah, and they started doing it, then they made a theology to defend it, right? So I'm not sure that the way that like Miriam is suggesting is all that different than what the early church did, right? Before we got into authority and power issues, when they were meeting in catacombs and gathering in homes and things like that. But I am, for all that, I am a bit of a traditionalist. I'm not sure, because it challenges my own sense of my own power and authority, in all honesty, right? And what I think it is, I'm sure for you, Tony, what I think it is I do as a priest, what that priestly vocation is, different from a lay vocation or a deacon's vocation, is really rooted in my interaction with the sacraments. So if I don't do that, if that's not my identity, then like we got a whole other kinds of conversations to have as well. Now that's all that I do, but in some ways that is a part that signifies my priestly vocation. And when I talk to people about their vocations, I often say to them, well, do you long to preside at Eucharist? Like, do you long to give, do the exercise, the sacrament of repentance? Do you long, like, to reach out your hands for healing? Do you long for these kinds of sacramental actions? Because I think that's a part of the vocation. So that's a really long, complicated answer, but I agree with Tony. God's in it. I don't really understand.
I said really early on when we were having these conversations that it was an opportunity for us to see beyond all of the trappings that go with communion, and to even see beyond the heavily weighted symbols that we use in communion, the bread and the wine and all the baggage that gets heaped on those two symbols. It was an opportunity for us, and it still is, I think, to discover that there was another symbol there all the time that I think we were missing because we were so focused on the bread and the wine. And the other symbol is the table, right? And this is a great opportunity for us to recover a sense of the table, right? And that can be recovered, I think, in church, because we're gathered around the table, in the parish hall, because we're gathered around the table, in the pub, in the coffee shop, because we're gathered around the table. Even here, we're gathered around a table of sorts, but now the table is digital, right? So I think there's a real opportunity for us here to recover a sense of the table, and that idea is something I think will resonate with all of our traditions. Whether you're Catholic or Protestant or evangelical or Anglican or Presbyterian, I think we all have that sense of the table. I think that's a human thing, right?
Yeah.
Humans have a sense of the table. More so than an altar.
Table theology gets me fired up anyway. I mean, like, I've spent the last year making cooking videos. Like,
Preach, Tyler, bring it. Come on.
I don't know how much time we got left. But I think about the Last Supper when Jesus was with his disciples, and like Scripture says, like John was literally like cuddled up with Jesus, like they were just lounging, right? Like they were around the table, they were doing this together, they were celebrating Passover, and it was just them around the table. And if you read through the Gospels, Jesus was at the table so much, especially in Luke. There's this book, it's called Meal with Jesus by Tim Chester, lovely little book. And he talks about how in our houses, our kitchen tables should be like, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't remember the word. It should be like a place of ministry, right? It should be like a man, I can't find that word I'm looking for. It should just be like a place of ministry, right? Like your kitchen table should be equivalent to like a home altar. Like it's the place of ministry. And I think Rob is right. That's definitely a piece that we're missing. No doubt about it.
I read a really interesting article to pick up on that's last year when Rob made me read a lot of things that suggested that the Eucharist really was not so much founded in the Last Supper in the early church, but all those meals where Jesus broke the rules, where he ate with people he wasn't supposed to eat with and did things he wasn't supposed to do, that was what they remembered. And I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Big
that's
time.
where that's where the name for our group comes from, Open Table Collective. We're trying to recapture the table ministry of Jesus, like Tyler just said, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that can really speak to people.
We used to do a lot of retreats at the convent in Grand Falls, and they have this beautiful image of the Last Supper, but it's not the traditional one, and it's got women there and it's got children there, and it looks more like Sunday dinner than it looks like the traditional image of the Last Supper. And I've always held on to that, because when we gather in community around table, whatever table it is, there's something holy about that.
Tony, and then we're gonna switch gears a bit.
I guess just to this point, if so many people in our churches have during liturgy have set up, an altar in their living room when they're watching, or around their kitchen table, and they have that sense of that holy table and that sacred space in their homes, and they have crafted it and created it. When they come back again, will our people say, I want that here? Because right now we've got an altar in a sanctuary, and it's, I don't know, about 30, 40, 50 feet away from the people, right? And we do that for sacred space and all that kind of stuff. But if you've got the intimacy in your home during lockdown and that appeals to you, I wonder if people, when they come back, are going to say, how can we have that intimacy here in the church? And will they have the courage to ask that and demand it? I hope they do. I hope
Great question.
That's great. Yeah. And I don't have time. There's a lot of really good comments about communion, and I don't have time to get to them all, because I want to switch gears a little bit now and go in a different direction.
Too bad.
I know we're gonna have another one of these just around communion.
I'd stay on this for hours.
And table fellowship. I know Brad Knoll said, now you got Tyler's undivided attention.
yeah, you got me fired up now.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about leadership. So what have you learned about leadership in times of crisis and change from COVID? And again, I'd love to hear from the people who are watching, whether you're a layperson or an ordained person. What have you also learned about leadership? What have you seen about seen from the leadership, whether that's in your parish, your diocese, your denomination? So what have you learned when it comes to leadership? Nothing. Okay, moving on. Let's go back to communion.
Hard question, Rob. In some ways, it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. It's about adaptability. But I also think it's finding ways of being present when you can't see one another, because in person, you still have to find ways to connect. It's a lot like what Joanne was talking about, those relationships. How do you build them in new ways? How do you keep connected? That's been one of the challenges I found, is how do we keep people connected to one another in this space that says we have to be physically distant from one another, but still remain connected. And I think that's been one of the big leadership challenges.
Early on, we did, our church is probably about 120-ish. So we spent a lot of hours just making phone calls, touching base with people that way. For our kids and youth ministries, we would do up like little boxes of stuff, and we go literally house to house and just drop stuff off, hang on the door, run away. We would do like stand on people's lawns and wave, and like just literally anything we could do to have that little bit of connection. Because I think the biggest thing people needed in all of our conversations, I think the biggest thing, it always comes back to connection. Like people love this online thing. They love familiar faces. They love watching service after service because it makes them feel connected. And so, you know, that was the biggest thing for me, was just figuring out any way to remain connected to some degree.
Anybody else?
I guess a couple of things come to mind. Some of you know that I also do work as a chaplain at the Health Sciences Center. And the thing that's taught me about leadership is that our leaders are very human. You know, I mean, I remember when the first lockdown came down, you know, everybody was scared, and people were looking to us to reassure them and support them. But I was scared too. And I didn't have answers. None of us had answers, right? And you couldn't always tell people that because they're looking to you to kind of help them. But you had to find people to say, look, I don't know what the hell is going to happen either, right? And, you know, I've had the experience now of you know, walking onto COVID wards and talking to COVID patients through monitors. And, you know, part of me is like screaming, get the hell out of here. What are you doing here? You know, even though you got all your garb on. And leadership is hard because it pulls you in places you really don't want to go, but you know you have to go, and you're wrestling. And you know, to any extent that I'm a leader, and I don't think I'm much of a leader, but if other leaders are feeling similar, it's tough, it's hard. And if anything, you want to tell our people, your leaders are human too, and they feel what you feel, and they might even feel it a bit more keenly, you know. And whatever position of leadership you're in, I think that's true of pastors as well as hospital chaplains, you know. And to your point, they're also adaptable. And you kind of have to be, because circumstances push you there. You don't realize what you're capable of until you're pushed there, right?
Yeah, Tony, the word that came to mind there when you were talking is vulnerability. Right? And I'm a big Brene Brown fan. I don't know if anybody else is. She talks a lot about vulnerability and about shame and those kind of things. And for me, even before COVID came along, I got schooled in vulnerability because 3 years ago, my dad died by suicide. And so I couldn't hide away. I was like, I was hurting, I was in pain, but I was still kind of like in a very public role. And so I learned I don't want to use the word power, but almost like the healing of vulnerability, right? That when people know that you're human and that you're in pain, you're suffering, you've experienced loss, or you have questions, or you're scared, or any of that stuff, I think it can lead to people viewing you. They can see a different kind of leadership in you, right? Rather than being this kind of distant hierarchical leader, that you're right there in the midst of them, going through the same shit that they're going through, hurting, losing people you love, having your own doubts. That can be really powerful.
And it's humbling, Rob. It's
Definitely
very humbling. And I think
Definitely.
leadership is humbling, and circumstances teach us that, right?
Yeah. I know we have a new bishop, and he's been, quite open to say, I don't know. I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know how we're going to get through this, but let's work together and, try to see what emerges on the other side. And I think, to me, there's something very, I can appreciate that, because I feel the same way, right?
I also feel like people are more keen to follow people who are more vulnerable like that. It's almost like they're more approachable, relational, because they're normal people. I think that's been a benefit of this online ministry, to bounce back to that real quick, is that people see us as normal people, Like they don't see us as these weird standoff, sort of clergy that they had a picture of. Because when people hear the word priest or pastor, they automatically have these pictures in their mind. But I think we've been given an opportunity to kind of show people like, hey man, like I'm a normal person like you, like we'll figure this out.
Yeah, I know the first few weeks of online worship, I was so uptight because I was afraid to screw up. But then after a few weeks, I'm like, if we were here in the room, I wouldn't feel like that. Like,
Yeah.
So I kind of just learned to just let it go and just be myself. And when you're doing that stuff, you are very human because you're going to goof up and, say the wrong thing, stand in the wrong place, or, sing off key if you're singing, although we haven't done much singing. That's another topic that's, really challenging.
I used to do that before COVID, goof up in the liturgy, so it was no different.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to share, Brad Knoll makes a really good point that I think has been highlighted around leadership.
Doesn't do that often.
I know, but that's why I'm just throwing him a bone here now. Right?
Yeah, good call.
So he says, I've learned there is a tremendous hunger out there for teaching. And I guess he adds, and I assume this is from listening tonight to this kind of, ecumenical conversation, that this is across all denominations. I think he's right. I think there is a real desire out there for people. People want to learn. They want to explore faith. They want to talk about things. I don't think they want to be told what to believe or what to think, but they definitely want to engage in those conversations, which again, I would say the technology that we've discovered and learned from the last year is like super cool when it comes to that. Like the possibilities are endless. Anything else?
I was just going to say, I think there's a similar, people are looking. I think Tony said it earlier too. People are searching. They want teaching. They want growth in faith. And that they may not know where to find it, but the online medium is giving them access to broader places to look for those conversations and learnings. And yeah.
I was trying to say something earlier and I realized I had my mic turned on.
That was such a great object lesson.
I know.
We were just talking about vulnerability and goofing up, and Joanne just did this like living parable for us.
I did. Well, what I was going to say back to the question of leadership, and I wouldn't normally before this have put this as a leadership skill, because you sort of think about leadership skills and crisis management and all the kind of things you learn. But the thing I learned in COVID, the most underrated leadership skill is prayer. Because how many times, I know, I'm sure all of you were the same thing. I'll be on the phone. Someone will be telling me all this stuff. I'm like, I don't know what. Let's have a prayer. I'll pray for that. I got nothing. I can't come over. I can't give you a hug. I can't hold your hand. I can't give you communion. I can't anoint you. I can't do anything like that. Let's pray. And I'm not really a phone prayer person, but I've learned. And thank you, Bishop Eddie, because he is a really good phone prayer person. But at first I felt incredibly vulnerable and helpless. Well, I'll pray. Well, but that was probably the best leadership skill I could display, because it was the one thing I could do. And people felt prayed for. And I don't know about you, but I felt prayed for a lot in the last year as well. So it may not be a technical skill. It may be a Hail Mary, no pun intended.
But even in that, right? There's the ability to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, we can't do anything else, let's just pray. Mm-hmm. Even in that there's vulnerability in that too, right?
Yeah. At this point in this conversation, I kind of want to pull an Oprah and get really personal and say, what have you learned about yourself in all of this? I don't know if anybody has any quick, thoughts, because I want to get on to some of the other things, but what have you learned about yourself and your own leadership style in this pandemic?
I learned I could apply for another job. And I mean, I laugh about that, and no disrespect or anything, but I had sort of given up on that as a dream. You asked me to be vulnerable, and all that time in quiet and prayer sort of enabled me to sort of look at what my vocation is and how I can live more fully into my vocation, and to dare to dream something possible that you can. I mean, like we all learn, we can all do way more than we thought we could. Right? We all have learned to do way more than we thought we could. And so that really, yeah. So I don't think I would have even considered, when people phoned me and asked me to think about this position as prophet, I would have even considered it for not for the things I learned during this pandemic, right? So, I mean, I guess that is a bit tongue in cheek, but that's really what I learned.
Yeah, my learning is similar, because I learned just to be more comfortable in who I am, and to know what I'm good at and to know what I'm not good at, and to focus on the things that I'm good at, and to be okay with letting people around me who are good at that other stuff, to let them do it. Because as clergy, we have this Messiah complex, right? That's the dark shadow side of what we do. It's okay to not be good at everything, and it's okay to let other people do stuff that you're not good at. Giving people permission. Joanne mentioned earlier about lay ministry. One of the biggest obstacles for lay ministry, us.
Yeah, big time.
Right? Yeah. And for me, the big learning this year is, this is what I'm good at. I turned 45 this year, and like I'm getting more curmudgeon-y every year. I just realized, this is who I am. This is what I'm good at. I'm going to do it. If you don't like it, tough. But then also the other side of that is being able to empower people around me to do the stuff that I'm not very good at. Anybody else? What do you learn about yourself?
Policy. I one of the things that I always found hard is like policy stuff and attention to detail, because I want to get there fast. I don't want to pay attention, but with COVID, you can't really afford to not pay attention to all the details, especially when it comes to following policy. So I learned that if I take my time, I can actually delve into it and work at it. And it goes to a broader point of, I'm capable of more than I think I am and give myself credit for. And navigating constant changing unknowns is part of what we have to do right now, because there's an air of uncertainty about everything. We were going to record church on Wednesday. I got a sore throat, can't go out, not really sick, but can't go anywhere. So how do we adapt? And everything's been like that, I think, over the past year, and just learning, if it's not going to work this way, how do I make it work another way?
Right. Tyler's wife said he got really good at video editing. Put that on your resume, buddy.
I will. Similar, I guess, to what Rob was saying. For me, it was learning to say no, because I'm the type of person, I'll do everything that I can until I die. Like right now, currently, I'm doing 2 full-time jobs for the next couple of weeks, and it is bananas. And I'll do this to myself all the time. So it's just learning for me when to say no. And part of that, like Rob said, is recognizing what I can do, what I can't do. I'm also a terrible delegator. It is what it is.
I don't have anything new to add, other than I just, I'm more adaptable than I thought I was. And, but I also learned too that people don't think the way I do. So that's, so that was like, oh, okay, and that actually, and it came up when I was on a committee to draw protocols for reopening. And in my mind, it was clear, public health is clear. This is a no-brainer. We got to do it this way. And people are like, no, why? And resisting and all the rest of it. And I thought, oh my God, like, how is this not clear? But I learned that I had to work better at communication. And they still may not agree. So.
Yeah, that thing about people thinking differently than me, I'm still struggling with that one. That is a tough one. That's going to take several pandemics for me to get good at that. Okay, so let's shift gears again now to last two questions are, a little bit different. So we've talked a lot tonight about things that have changed and challenges and all that kind of stuff. What's the one thing that has changed this year because of the pandemic that you hope doesn't change back? That it just it sticks.
Less busy.
Yeah.
I got 2 kids, and I guess for me the gift of, and I know this doesn't relate to church, but maybe it connects, but like every night of the week it seemed we were driving them somewhere, and the gift of the pandemic is we actually ate meals together every night of the week, and that's been nice. And when we started opening up in the fall, one of the things we looked at was how to have less go and more kind of together time. So that's my, and I know that's not church, but maybe churches could be less busy. I don't know. I haven't really thought about how to apply it, but certainly the importance of those family relationships has become really clear.
But wouldn't that be a great thing if the church did finally learn that lesson and then live a countercultural example for the rest of the world to say,
Yeah,
we don't have to buy into this busyness thing. But because in the church, I find amongst us clergy, busyness is like a drug, right?
Yeah.
And we're all like Tyler. We'll say, yes, yes, yep, I'll do that. Because you feel like you're doing something, right?
Yep.
And I agree with Miriam that that's one thing I hope stays is the slower pace. I've enjoyed not having to go out so much in the evening for work, not as many meetings, more downtime. And my dog loves this. We go for a walk every day now, right? He loves it. If things go, change and go back to the way they were before, he's going to be very upset with me.
Oh, he's gonna have some separation anxiety, man.
Yep.
Maybe we all could stand to reclaim some notion of Sabbath in our lives. Yeah.
I was gonna hop in on that topic. I'm currently working through the spiritual disciplines in video format now. And man, our lie, we've hook, line, and sinker bought into the culture of busy and hurried, and it's absolutely destroying us. Dallas Willard once was asked what the biggest hindrance to spiritual growth is, and he said, no, he was asked how to grow spiritually, and he said you need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. That was his one answer. That was his thing, right? Like, how do you grow spiritually? Be less hurried. And so you look at Jesus's life, right? And he was busy, but he wasn't hurried. He was never in a rush. And he did things like silence and solitude and Sabbath and live like a simple life and all these sorts of things. So I would say, Miriam, that that directly relates to church. And I really hope that we don't go back to that. And we've been pretty key. Man, I'm losing words flat out. We've been pretty persistent on making our church not super busy here. Like we try not to make people's lives busier than what they need to be. So we've been on that journey for some time now, but I do hope that it doesn't go back to the way it was, because it was nuts.
Yeah. And a reminder to the people who are watching too, we'd love to hear from you guys too, what you hope doesn't change. That, something that COVID changed, but you hope it stays the same. One of my parishioners, I don't know if she's watching tonight, Charlotte Barrington, she said very early on, she hopes that the offering plate doesn't come back.
Yeah.
She always says it's not very hospitable to have guests over and then shake them down for money. Right? Like, I agree with her. I kind of like the idea
I do
of the
too.
offering plate. It's in the back somewhere. If you want to give, plus there's all these new techie ways to give now. And it's fine for me to say that. And some people, who might be watching from parishes that are struggling financially, because that's one of the other big realities that came out of the pandemic is the financial hit. They were saying, well, you got to get every bit of money you can. And I understand that, but I don't know, something about hospitality that's,
Yeah.
lacking.
How
in
you
here.
get the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Something that you hope doesn't go back to normal?
One thing that COVID reminded me of, and it's nothing new, but we do forget it, and it's that people matter. Relationships, the people you love matter. When your family can't visit you because you're sick in hospital and you're there by yourself, it creates a huge ache in people, And I mean, people can FaceTime, and that's excellent. Don't get me wrong, that's the lifeline. But people matter, and I'd like to see church embrace that and say, you know what, people matter, and what they do and what church does and what it says, it needs to put people first and their relationships first, and that'd be a great lesson to come out of COVID.
Mm. Anything to add, Joanne?
No, I mean that's very. I think I go back to sort of what I said in the beginning. I hope our focus outside of the building that we don't lose that the focus is people and relationships, and yeah, that we can function without buildings, and that's a shocking thing for especially places like I serve that have beautiful, amazing historical buildings, and but that does not contain us or define us. I hope we continue to remember that.
Yeah, I don't know if you people who are here with me on Zoom or the people who are watching online are into podcast, but there's a great podcast called The Liturgist. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. They've been doing some really great stuff this season on like the future of Christianity, or like, should Christianity survive? Like, and a lot of the same stuff that we're talking about here now, they're talking about, like the need to shift focus from institutions to people and to focus on spirituality over religion and dogma, on getting out there in the community with people rather than being stuck in our building. So I would highly recommend it for people to listen to. They do swear a little bit too, so if you're sensitive about that, you might want to be prepared.
But don't you think that's evidence of the spirit? I mean, that here in Newfoundland and people wherever the liturgist, in states, I think if you read stuff, people all over the world of different faith traditions are saying the same thing. I mean, to me, that's an amazing witness to the power of the spirit if we will pay attention.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Roxborough in his book, I don't remember the title, Changing God, Changing the Church, Remaking the World, something, I don't remember.
Joining with God, or something that's a whole big long title.
Joining with God, Remaking the Church, Changing the World, something like that. He talks about the idea that what if like this decline we've seen in church culture and church attendance, what if that's actually a move of the Spirit? And we're working against it somehow. And I've been thinking about that a lot during COVID. Like what's going to birth out of these new expressions of church and understandings of church, and what's that all going to look like? And it's exciting, I think.
And Rob, you're going to point out who else says that, right?
John Caputo.
He's a bit of a fanboy for John Caputo.
We're friends on Facebook.
That's amazing. Roxborough was at Queen's once, and I completely missed it. Didn't even know about it.
Yeah, he did a conference for us here in the diocese.
Yeah, I was super sad about that.
Interesting guy.
I've heard.
Yep. So, okay, now my last question. When I end, and all the stuff we've been saying is positive, but let's continue going with the positive vibes. In looking back at the whole year of COVID, and seeing where we are right now, which on the Avalon, where most of us are, except for Joanne, we're still in some pretty tight restrictions, but we feel like, the vaccines are on the horizon. And I've heard a lot of my parishioners now getting their first dose of the vaccine. Things seem to be opening up a bit more again now. Talk today of the Atlantic bubble reopening, potentially a Canada-wide bubble by Canada Day if all goes well. There seems to be a lot more positivity right now. Plus, we're, at some point, spring is going to come here to Newfoundland.
Sunday.
Well, in theory, it's
In
gonna
Sunday.
theory,
come.
yeah.
I'm sick of. We got a snowstorm tonight, but Sunday.
I look at pictures of people in Ontario and they're like in shorts and t-shirt and like bastards. So, but like with all that stuff, there seems to be a bit of a more positive energy now. But still, that underlying current of a little bit of despair and mental health challenges, all that kind of stuff, still very real. And the financial fallout is going to be big time. What right now fills you with hope? What fills you with hope? And this could be about the church. It could be about your community. It could be about society or what God is doing in the world. What fills you with hope? And same thing for the people who are listening, watching. What fills you with hope?
I'm sticking to what I said earlier. It's people claiming their vocation and their discipleship. That really fills me with hope. I see so many people living out their faith and claiming it. Right, yeah, that gives me hope.
I was thinking that it's what we were talking about just a minute ago. Like, there's something going on in the world, and I'm excited to see what's gonna emerge, to borrow from our title, in the church right now, because I think there's so many things that make it an exciting time to be in the church, new possibilities. I just think that there's an open-ended question of what's next and how will we be followers of the way of Jesus right now, and it may not look the same. And I'm not the one who despairs that. I'm like, bring it on. It's exciting. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. And yeah, open-ended. Who knows?
Yeah, one of my favorite writers is Kester Bruin, and he's from the UK, part of the whole radical theology movement. And when he talks about the institutional church, he says, "Let it all die and then throw a big party." I kind of like that. Anybody else? What fills you with hope?
I guess there's two things. First of all, kind of picking up on what you said, the people who still hunger for meaning and spiritual purpose, who have accept or made the courageous step maybe to not come to church anymore or to leave, but continue to seek and to search and to hunger. I know that God is with them, and I know that one day we will catch up with them, and so that gives me hope. And the other hope is, I'm going to give a shout out to every nurse who walks into a COVID patient's room to care for them when nobody else can go in there and is dressed up. People who will do that, they give me hope. So a shout out to all the nurses out there.
Yes.
I know one of the comments on here is from Victoria Featherston, and she says, what brings her hope is people being the church, embodying faith. And I think, because we've been apart for so long now physically, I think, the future for us is you're going to hear a lot of that talk about embodying our faith and being physically present, right? And finding creative ways to do that both in person, but also online, because what we're doing here, this is not magic, right? Like there's still a physicality to what we're doing. There's wires and satellites and all that kind of stuff and hardware that we use. So this is not magic. There's a physicality to this too, right? So the importance of embodying our faith, I think, is going to be really important. There's been a lot of themes that I think we've hit on tonight that I think are going to be really important for the church moving forward. Table fellowship, the idea of spirituality and slowing down, lay ministry, a lot of really important stuff that I think, and a lot of opportunity, a lot of common ground there for all, of the Christian traditions to kind of come together maybe work together more too, right? I know in my diocese right here now, there's been a lot of emphasis on, Anglican parishes working together, and I think that's fine. But I think we got to find ways for us to work together across denominational lines too, because I think there's a
And maybe
way.
faith lines.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's part of the Spirit's moving too, right? Is the connections between the Muslim community, the Jewish community, the Hindu community, all these different communities, and I would even say those outside of religious traditions, right?
The nuns. I mean, the
nuns.
ONES, not the AUN.
Although the nuns too. I mean,
The nuns are cool.
let's not forget the sisters.
No. I went to a conference and I couldn't my parishioner said, I don't know why you're going to a conference about nuns, but because she thought I was man in UN.
My husband said to me a month ago, I think it was when Tony, Rob, and I were getting together to burn ashes. He says, this is a global pandemic, and in this time you've never collaborated more with other people than you have, and that's been one of the joys, is the collaboration that I've had with other people, and it's made possible for me to collaborate not just with other people in this province but across Canada, and engage in conversations about faith in different ways, and that's been such a great thing.
Totally. Yeah.
No more boundaries.
I've collaborated with a lot of great people through this kind of thing, the Open Table Collective. I got to give a shout out to Amanda Taylor and Gail McDonald and Eric Squires, who we've partnered with in their parishes over the summer, but also during Lent. Joanne and I have partnered on a bunch of stuff. It's just been fantastic. And the technology allows you to partner with people wherever. You don't have to be in the same city, the same province, same country.
Or the same country, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We had someone read for one of our services from England.
Wow.
Oh, cool.
Why not?
Even tonight, someone commented on our stream here from New Zealand.
Casual.
We're famous.
I wouldn't go that far, but infamous maybe. Anybody have any final last words of hope before we clue up?
No hope to be found.
There is. There's lots of hope. I see lots of signs of hope. What I think probably what fills me with the most hope is young people. Right? I see a younger generation now that cares an awful lot about this planet, cares an awful lot about justice and equality, and just are so empathetic. And they get a shitty ride all the time. People are so down on young people, on millennials and Gen Zs. But I think they're the most kind, compassionate cohort that we've seen in a long time. I'm from Generation X, and we don't care about anybody, only ourselves. Right? And so when I look at my daughters, who are will be 24 and 21 this year, I just think the world's going to be okay, because if those kind of people are the ones who are going to be leading things, I did a thing last week for my check-in and a couple of young people, and I think if that's the people who are going to be leading the church, we're going to be okay. It's going to be different because they're going to change a lot of stuff, but it's going to be cool.
It'll be good.
Good.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to make sure to go back through the feed to answer any questions and comments that are there from people. I have no idea what was going on the Beer and Hymns feed, because I only have 2 sets of eyes and 2 devices here to check. And so if we didn't get to you, we apologize. But thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to Miriam and to Tony and to Tyler and to Joanne for sharing your experiences of the past year. We've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go, but we're going to get there together and with God's help.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. God bless.
Night.
Hi, everybody.